happening at WDC this morning. We do have an apology from one member of the committee, and we're also joined by the Mayor online. Unfortunately, he has succumbed to the flu. So we have an apology from Councillor Percival, Madam Chair. Do we have any declarations of interest? Sorry. Would someone like to move that we accept? Thank you, Councillor Linwood. Seconded, Councillor Blackler. All those in favour? Aye. Carried. Do we have any declarations of interest from the members of the subcommittee? There are no declarations. So we're meeting today to start and make some decisions around recommending to full council approval of the proposed district plan. I'd like to ask Mr. Campbell, our planning manager, if he would like to give a brief introduction as to what's happening today and how we've got to this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before I start on that, just like to welcome our new planner, Andrew Mactier, sitting back there. He's on day 2 today, so he will be helping us in the consent space and also with this important project as well. He brings significant experience from Selwyn District Council, working in their district plan space as well, so it's a real bonus to get him on the team. So welcome, Andrew. See how you go today. Observing. This is the first of 4 scheduled meetings to work through a series of chapters of the district plan. And the way we've kind of ordered it is to try and work through those chapters and topics that have had less feedback since on the draft from last year. So this is a tranche of chapters. There's 9 there. There's going to be another similar amount next week. So it's important that we work through them one by one. I think Ainsley has the meeting set up that we can go through them individually and get them in a form that you're both happy with, but also conscious that these will be submitted on. There could be changes as a result of that. So they won't be the final version. That's an important point to note. And as we've mentioned in the past, as we worked through, the draft was very much a draft. We knew that. It had a lot of good feedback, and you've all seen that feedback and given us a bit of a steer as to what you think of that. Now's the kind of time to make a call. Are we happy with the wording based on any changes that we think could be made from that feedback? A lot of areas, the wording's there to try and reflect what we do need in terms of statutory requirements. Some of it is to try and pick up any new good practice or legislative changes. So yeah, we work through them step by step and see where we end up. So we do have a couple of hours available this morning. Hopefully we won't necessarily need all that time. It just gives us time if we do need to spend longer on one or more chapters to work through it. And we can kind of kick off if people want to get started. Any other sort of questions? We do have obviously more meetings coming up. So if something is really problematic, we don't want to end up with a whole lot of chapters in the last meeting, but if there's something really problematic that can't be resolved, then it could be bumped to a later meeting. But just bear in mind, we do have this many, if not more, chapters coming up later. Some of them are the ones we've had a lot more feedback on, so we want to spend time on them. If the way it's sort of set up, if there's kind of minor wording, grammatical type changes, we can deal with that by kind of common resolution that wraps up those things for which would then have full council approval when it's ready for the whole plan to be approved. So this is really just that working through them individually, pick up any sort of major issues that we need to, but by and large, these ones didn't have a lot of feedback. They should be fairly straightforward to work through. If there's things we need to clarify, we can. If there's things you want to sort of discuss offline in terms of how they work or relate to other chapters, we can do that as well. So we're not sort of spending a whole lot of time today going through the cross relationships. And that's often the difficulty when you're working with a subset of the district plan. You're not necessarily, it's hard to link it all up because you've got to go back to draft versions and so on. So this way is a wee bit clunky, but we can explain any of those sort of cross relationships, outside the meeting if you want to discuss how it all works. So happy to do that.
Thank you, David. All right, we'll move to the first chapter, that which is an introduction and general provisions in terms of relating to mana whenua.
Okay.
Yes, no.
Right, you're asking it. All right. Okay. I've got a number of comments about all of these chapters. I make that point at the start, so I'm not focusing exclusively on one. But there's a couple of things in terms of the text on the first page. I'm just curious whether we are absolutely comfortable with having a plan that says that Rūnaka geographically remote from us, outside the district, have some form of kaitiaki in the area. Now, I noticed that the four Rūnaka identified are Te Rūnaka o Arawhenua, Puketeraki, Waihao and Maoreki. Now, I would have thought, in all seriousness, that the engagement or an entitlement of the Rūnakas o Waihao and o Arawhenua would be geographically limited. And that the idea of those two Rūnaka engaging in matters that affect areas outside their rohi are outside their specific areas, not the rohi, is a matter of contestability. In the next paragraph, where mana whenua areas of interest overlapping in the activity and the need is recognised to require working with its treaty partners, the WDC will first consult with Te Rūnaka o Maoreki. Now, I think the words with its treaty partners are problematic. You know, I'd much prefer that to read with mana whenua. I mean, if I refer you in reference to that, page 14, where it actually says, under Rakatirataka, second paragraph, the Crown apology to Kaitahu, recorded in the Ngaitahu Claim Settlement Act, explicitly recognises the Rakatirataka of Kaitahu within its rohi. Consistent with this recognition, Kaitahu aspires to develop a true partnership with local government regarding resource management rather than merely a stakeholder relationship. Well, it can't be both. It's one or the other. I mean, the statement on page 14 says that the Kaitahu aspire to develop a true partnership. The statement on page 10 says they are treaty partners, or the four Rūnaka are treaty partners. I believe the wording is problematic, and I believe it should be amended as I've suggested. So do you want me to go through all of them, or just those ones at the start?
No, I might just go to the Mayor online. He's got his hand up. Mayor Kircher?
I just want to make the statement that Waihao and Arawhenua have shared rohi with Maoreki, particularly at the top end of our district. So they're not, their inclusion doesn't mean that they're involved in everything, but just when it includes that part of the district and there's resource consents and so on, that's the bit that they're interested in. Having said that, they also do allow Wairakei and Okaha sometimes to speak on their behalf. So that's a relationship that they have with staff. So it is quite right to make sure that we do include them. But yeah, it is limited to the bits that they identify as being their rohi.
Thank you. You can continue if you want, Councillor Hopkins.
Well, if we can go to page 11, and this is where you get what I think is a conflict between church and state. Essentially, it's a conflict between, shall we say, spiritual sets of beliefs and shall we say, secular administration. I would like to see at the bottom of the that page, relationship to ancestral lands. The relationship of Mana Whenua with the land goes back to the time of creation, which centres around two recognised narratives that bind Kaitahu whānau to the land. Now, I would like to see that referred to as the time of the creation narrative, which centres around two recognised stories that bind. I mean, we would not write Genesis into the district plan on the basis that that's how the world began and everyone is obliged to accept that. We would accept anyone and everyone's entitlement to believe whatever they wish to believe about the origins of life and the world. But those beliefs should be represented as belief, not statement of fact. And that sentence represents this version of creation as a statement of fact. And I think it should be changed. Now, I'm just trying to, I do note with sadness the historical account on page 12 of the treatment of Te Makarua and his group in the Upper Waitaki. And I think it's something that I would like to see the district and the district council commemorate more clearly and explicitly. Again, on page 13, through whakapapa, all people and life forms descend from a common source. Again, a spiritual belief expressed as a statement of fact. I'm not challenging the belief. I'm challenging the fact that it's presented as the only version of reality to which we should subscribe. I think actually, yeah. Page 15, the difficulty I have with all these words have meaning. So if we look under Tauka at the bottom, Tauka includes sites and resources such as Wahitapu, Tauraka Waka, and Kai Mataitai, other sites for gathering food and cultural resources, tribally significant landforms, features, and cultural landscapes, Waihi Tupuna. Now, the difficulty with all of that is it's generality. I mean, any landscape that has had human occupation for any period of time is a cultural landscape. And driving through the Otago yesterday, there's evidence of at least three cultural landscapes, visible evidence of cultural landscapes. And one of the debates about this whole matter is, if you wish, and it's uncomfortable and awkward, and we need to resolve it in a compassionate way and in a lucid way, but it's a clash of cultural landscapes, and it's a clash of the principles and precepts embodied in those cultural landscapes. So simply asserting that there is one cultural landscape should not ultimately nullify the character, nature, or shall we say, priorities of others. For that reason, on page 16, if you look, it is important to Mana Whenua that Waihi Tapu sites and Waihi Tupuna sites are protected from inappropriate activity, and that there is continued access to such sites for Kaitahu Whanui. Well, the difficulty with that is, how do you, I mean, this is where the rules aren't here, But I would have thought some qualifications in that might be appropriate, like agreed or negotiated or discussed or, I mean, as of now, I can't say to you, I'm just, you know, I want to walk across your land. And I have an absolute right to because it's my cultural landscape, which I could assert that it might be. I'd have to ask you first. Now, I'm not suggesting that everyone has to go cap in hand, and I am suggesting that there should be some form of negotiation. I would make the point that if you look at the various references in here to the Ngaitahu Settlement Act, every explicit reference to access here only relates to Crown lands, where there's a guarantee of access. There appears to be nothing that's cited in this chapter that requires access other than that is provided for in the Act. So again, I would just suggest the language needs to be modified slightly, perhaps.
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. Mr. Campbell, you wanted to reply?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. And I think too that the context of this chapter is it's solely focused on those mana whenua values. So the other district plan chapters cover the other heritage matters as well. It is kind of difficult to reflect the, I guess, belief side of it, and that sort of where it blurs the line and appears factual as written. It's certainly not the intent. It's to say, in the context of the plan, this is a chapter that talks about those mana whenua matters, and it's a reflection of that kind of history and association. And it doesn't go as far as talk about access or treaty settlements. Those sort of things are outside this. So whether we need something that explains that as a kind of explanation, like a sort of footnote almost in the chapter, if that helps. But it's kind of, we've got to be careful. The district plan's all encompassing versus trying to explain all this other legislation that interacts. So we're kind of saying, here are the values we've been provided for this particular topic. It doesn't take away all those issues around access and how treaty settlements are held, that type of thing, which we don't want to clog up the plan with all that information either. So that's a tricky balancing act. And I get that often the way it's written can come across like we're kind of stating it as fact. This is the values under mana whenua. And I don't think people would sort of read it in isolation and think that's the only kind of thing important for the district. But yeah, whether we want to add too much more narrative around those other things is where that sort of balance lies, I guess.
I'm not asking for more narrative. I'm simply suggesting that where issues of belief are expressed, they are described as such, in the same way that if we were to have a reference to the Genesis, we would say Christians believe, or the belief is that in the beginning was the light, was the word, and the word was made light. I'm not challenging it. Every culture has creation myths and origin myths or stories, and some of them, all of them, may be true. Very difficult, objectively, rationally, to prove them. And all I'm suggesting is that there is an issue of the separation of, it's a cultural thing, but for good reasons, there's been a long-standing separation of church and state. And actually, I do have some other things on further pages, Mr. Chair, but
while you're running hot, Councillor, keep going.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. We'll just give Mr. Campbell a right of reply to your right of reply.
Okay, right, fine, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just quickly, we can kind of add a preamble to that to say it reflects the beliefs of, so that's easy to probably slot in.
All right.
Happy we won't necessarily identify where or how that is, but if you're happy that a resolution could capture that we reflect on Councillor Hopkins' points and make it clear that it is stating the beliefs of as a catch-all. So it doesn't change the intent of the chapter. It just gives clarity. It's
Yeah.
not a statement of facts, it's a statement of their beliefs.
All right,
And you're
thank
happy
you
for
for that.
us to include that wherever is appropriate.
Yes. Councillor Hopkins, before I let you continue, I've missed, the deputy mayor to my right, so, sorry, councillor.
No, no problem at all. Through the chair, I just wanted to respond, just to that comment. I just want to support, Mr. Campbell's, comments around just this particular chapter around mana whenua is just recognising, like just the beliefs, and this was well before, colonisation revolutionised cultural change, within, like the mana whenua values and beliefs. And I think it's rightfully said so, like in terms of, just acknowledging the recognition of iwi and hapu, but also their relationship to the ancestral lands. It provides the cultural context that's important for us to value and to acknowledge, and also just the relationship that mana whenua have with land. So I don't think it's anything to take personally in terms of the, like the secularization of the church and state. This was well before colonization came to Aotearoa.
Look, I don't take it personally. I'm not, the difficulty with this whole conversation is it's become, not here around this table, I'm happy to say, but it has become, unfortunately, polarizing and unnecessarily polarized. I mean, in my view, it is perfectly reasonable to discuss some of these issues in a way that I think is respectful, but also tries to respect what we are seeking to achieve in these documents. And it also tries to respect the fact that words have weight. And my concern is that a simple phrase in a legal document, in a chapter in a plan, can end up in a court hearing being the thing that turns a decision one way or t'other. And I just think we need to always to think of those sort of unintended consequences of language. If I may just carry on then very briefly, unless and on page 18, unless and until there is either statutory change or a referendum determining as such, this country is not at the moment called Aotearoa New Zealand. It's called New Zealand. And that's the terminology that was used when King Charles was sworn in. And I don't think the document here should create a name for the nation that doesn't actually exist at the moment. And I'll just draw members of the committee's attention to the two references in the Ngāi, or the two references to the Ngāi Tahu Claim Settlement Act at the bottom of that page, and how those rights in relation to management and so forth are actually subsequently described as being expressed. I also note that the only requirement in the Act on page 19 that is referenced in the chapter here, the only requirement on us is that the WDC must have regards to effects on Kaitahu when considering the need for notification of such resource consents, is the ones that are listed above in relation to Lake Ohau, Matakaia, the Kakanui River, the Waitaki River, Mahi, Tukumu, Lake Eviemore, and Lake Benmore. And at the bottom of that page, the Nohoaka entitlements provide a right of seasonal occupation and use for Kaitahu whānau of specified areas of Crown-owned land near water bodies for harvest of natural resources. And then on the next page, and this is a question I have for the planners, there's a reference at the bottom of that, page 19, contemporary Nohoaka within the Waitaki district include Lake Ohau River, Ahuriri River, Lake Benmore, Lake Eviemore, Waitaki River, Wainakarua River. Now, is this only the Crown land? What mapping's been done here? The way this page reads in the plan, it's all of those areas. But in fact, if we are to reference the NTCSA, that can't be the case. And the only other thing I'd like to see on page 20, there's a reference to under hapu and iwi planning documents. There's one, the Kaitahu Ki Otago Natural Resource Management Plan 2005 and the Waitaki Iwi Management Plan 2019. Can they be included as appendices to the plan or linked so that people looking at this chapter and other things can actually see them? That's a lot from me on this chapter.
Thank you, councillor Hopkins. Mr Campbell?
Thank you, Mr Chair. Just dealing with the last matter first, we can certainly have links to those documents on our website and that sort of thing. We wouldn't append them necessarily, it would get too long, but certainly through the new e-plan, it'll have a link to take you directly to them. It's a tool we can put in place. Going back to the earlier question around the Nahuaka sites, they can be identified and some of them are quite small, but I guess in the end of page 19, it talks about the occupation of those areas near those water bodies. So the Ahuriri River, for example, it's a small area just above the State Highway Bridge out of Amarama. So it's a known area and we can map it. So it's referring to those sites next to those rivers. So there might be more than one, but rather than kind of identify them individually in the words, we've just listed the fact there are sites and there might be more than one next to those water bodies listed. Bear in mind, most of those water bodies are either DOC or Land Information New Zealand land, but they sit within a river or lake bed of, and like the Waitaki River and Wainaka River, it does sort of specify, or tries to specify more specific locations relating to those areas. So yeah, it's just reflecting what's already been put in place under those arrangements. And yeah, if we can try and be specific, we can, and other times we keep it a wee bit more vague for various reasons.
Councillor McCone, welcome to the debate.
G'day. Yeah, page 21, consultation with Manawanua. Are there more specific guidelines around that? It says applicants for resource consent are encouraged to contact the HOKA prior to lodging their application, and then they can advise whether that consultation with the Ranaka is required. That's reasonably loose in the first instance. Secondly, work is to be done on a cost recovery basis. So is there a guidance on that cost recovery? You're dealing with, in the main, rural land that this covers over, and you're also dealing with private enterprise and people that actually have private ownership of that land. But I'm not saying that they don't respect it, they respect what they've already got. They're pretty good guardians of what they have. But that's pretty loose. And it also says further down, they couldn't consult earlier with AHOKA, particularly with the cultural values need considered. These are businesses, so other timelines, they don't want to be waiting 12 months for a decision. They want to know somewhere of what's happening in the interim. So I think that could be tidied up a bit.
Mr Campbell?
Thank you, Mr Chair. Thank you, Councillor McCone. It's certainly a point we've been reminded of quite regularly on this topic, and not just this, but whether it's Heritage New Zealand or other entities. But my understanding is there'll be a service level agreement between us and Okaha for those issues. The cost part's a wee bit tricky because some things might be almost a no cost if there's not a big issue. If it's a larger, e.g. Macrae's mine type thing, then you'd expect there to be more work to be done across a larger area. But they can certainly have a table or schedule of the fees and type of consents and range of costs. So I think if we can get that from them to at least have as off to the side when people are applying for consent, that's information we can provide to say, hey, these type of activities generally have these type of costs, and the service level will try and pick up the timeframes, because you certainly don't want people waiting for months and months for a straightforward decision. But it's just really a need to flag that it's needed. The trigger would be the Waihi Te Puna mapping. If it's in those areas, then it's the trigger.
You know, I totally understand that, and I know we understand around here what's going on with our local people. I'm just thinking further into the future. Words here don't necessarily stick up for what might happen in 10 or 15 years' time. So there needs to be some form of written document of the way it works and how it works, and it can be changed further down the track if it needs to be. But you must start from a direction to start that of a written direction rather than a verbal one.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I understand the logic of this, and I wasn't unduly concerned by it because it does actually say applicants are encouraged to contact. There's no obligation, nor is there any penalty if they don't, although there may be a penalty in terms of protracted debate or argument over whether consent should be granted or not. But it does seem to me to be prudent and fair. The only difficulty I have with it is that what's stated on page 21, i.e. that applicants should consult early with Ōkaha, does appear to be possibly in conflict with what is stated right at the beginning on page 10, where it says that where mana whenua areas of interest overlap in any activity and the need is recognised to require working with its tree partner / mana whenua, WDC will first consult with Te Rūnaka o Maureki. Now, I kind of get the logic of the distinction, but I wonder if the planners identify a potential inconsistency or conflict there. And why does the council go to the Rūnaka and the applicant go to the consultancy?
Thanks, Councillor Hopkins. Yeah, what it's saying is we encourage people to first approach them, flesh out any issues. If that doesn't happen for whatever reason, then we would refer it on anyway. So it's a double whammy, but it just tries to encourage people to go and talk to them. Yeah. So it's not. Yeah.
Is there anyone else wants to speak to this chapter? So in trying to read the mood of the room, I would understand that one, there are some concerns as to the addition of a preamble or a footnote that would emphasise the cultural nature of these views. I also would concur with Councillor McCone that whilst it would appear that we are very nitpicky at this stage, we need to get the wording correct now to remove any misinterpretation down the track.
Yes, we can certainly reflect that kind of cultural beliefs element in the early on in the chapter for that aspect. It's not a problem. That doesn't change the substance of what we're considering today.
Madam GA?
The other reference that was made during there was to add links to the Hapu and iwi planning documents on council's website. So I've got those 2 points, the introductory comments to state that the wording is based on beliefs, and the links to the Hapu and iwi planning documents on the website, not in the plan.
Councillor Hopkins?
Well, the one or two other quite specific, I'm not reiterating, the one or two other quite specific changes to words or suggestions that, you know, to word A be replaced by word B, or words A be replaced by words B. And I'll leave those with the planners for the moment, hoping that they will accept them in the spirit in which they were intended. Let's move to the strategic directions.
Yes, I did record what Mr. Campbell said, and that is that they would take on board the comments of Councillor Hopkins, and that is an action point.
Yeah.
I think you could ask for a moving seconder.
on the basis of the directions that we've given, for change, do we have a mover, of this chapter? Thank you, councillor Hopkins, seconded by councillor Blackler. Those members of the subcommittee in favour, please say aye. It is carried. So we move on to the chapter on strategic direction. Councillor Hopkins, would you like to
If you allow me, Mr. Chair. Thank you
start to
very much.
elucidate on this particular chapter?
Well, okay, very quickly, not quite so many, but a few. Under the, on the first page, which is, I think, page 25 of our agenda, I would invite anyone in the go-go, exciting, throbbing, pulsating, disco ball, glittering world of planning to explain the meaning of this last sentence in the second paragraph. There is no hierarchy within or between any of the strategic direction objectives. And if they can't explain it simply, I think it could be taken out. On the next page, page 26, I question, if you look at the objective 01, provide a network of public open space and recreation areas with diversity of type and size and associated public amenities, recreational facilities and infrastructure to meet the current and future recreation, cultural, health and well-being needs of the community. And I do, again, bearing in mind that the word culture here is not particular to a culture, it is general, I do question the need to include cultural needs in the objective for open space and recreation. I believe that objective could just as easily and logically and lucidly read future recreation, health and well-being needs. Objective 02, recognition, protection and future opportunities for Waitaki's heritage. I notice that we are actually proposing to provide opportunities for the ongoing use and adaptive reuse of our heritage buildings and areas. I'm just wondering, yeah, no, that's fine. The last one on that page again, we've got mana whenua values, rights and interests. We're proposing to protect and recognise, and I genuinely wonder in some instances whether we can absolutely and always guarantee to protect and recognise. We can, should and must recognise mana whenua values, rights and interests, but whether in every instance we should commit to protecting them, I wonder. On the next page, 27, there are two statements. Objective 2 with regard to Oamaru Harbour. Neither of the objectives relating to the harbour or dark skies. Each of them is a description of what they currently provide. Neither of them is an indication of what the objective is. All the others talk about improving, protecting, restoring, doing certain things. But those two, NE02 and NE03, are simply statements of what the harbour and dark skies offer. And I think the objective needs to be reworded to indicate that what we intend to do is continue to maintain or ensure that Oamaru Harbour continues to contribute and ensure that the dark sky values at Kakanui continue to contribute, something of that nature. And under adapting to climate change.
I can just interrupt you, Councillor. It's just as the list gets longer, it's hard to have a specific reply. So, Mr. Campbell.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, that was getting quite long. Certainly in terms of those last two objectives, Councillor Hopkins, we could just make it sure that it's clear they are objectives and have words like to ensure that the Oamaru Harbour or the dark sky values, just so it's clear that it is more a statement. Going back to the SDMW02, Mana Whenua values, rights and interests, it's perhaps just caught up in the wording there, and it might be better to split it out, and I think we can just double check, but it could be reworded to say protect Mana Whenua values and recognise Mana Whenua rights and interests. So it's clear you're not kind of lumping it all into the two words there.
Yes.
And going back to the previous point about the statement about the hierarchy, it goes back to your earlier point that we don't want someone to sort of read it and think there is a hierarchy in a court of law or something like that. So it's just being explicit to say they are kind of treated equally or individually if need be, but it's probably important to have that statement there so someone doesn't say, well, this one's ahead of that one, so it's got to.
Can we put it in simple?
I think we'd prefer the glitter ball approach. Thank you.
Please continue, councillor Hopkins.
Look, my last one on this chapter, my last one, other people may have others. Is on page 2702, adapting to climate change. I'd like to add a fifth measure. And I'd like that measure to read, well, if you like, let's go to the top. Adapting to climate change. The effects of climate change are recognised and an integrated management approach is adopted, including through 5, taking measures to protect identified or consider taking measures to protect identified sites and areas. Because the difficulty I have is there's nothing in here that says, hey, there's a particular place or places that are really so important that we're going to look very hard at how we might keep them in situ rather than have managed retreat as the only solution in every instance.
Thank you. Can you be a bit more specific about what sort of sites and areas you're talking about, Councillor Hopkins? Just
Well,
so it would have to be quite clear in here what we're talking about, I think.
Look, I didn't want to be, but I mean, the difficulty we have with the debate at the moment nationwide is that the only thing the government appears to be promulgating or proposing is managed retreat, essentially. Now, there is some talk about, you know, resilience and the like, but it's no one appears to be particularly keen to grasp that nettle. But I mean, we have a number of significant coastal settlements that are subject to challenge now and maybe subject to challenge in the future. We have sections of roadway that are subject to challenge now and maybe subject to greater challenge in the future, which we may wish to actually keep going, because in the end it's cheaper to keep them in situ with a barrier than build a whole new road to a similar standard in some other part of the district. I didn't particularly want to say this place, and this place, but it might be that you guys can, I mean, this is a general objective. I was quite deliberately trying to avoid being that specific, to be honest.
I'll come to you, Mr. Campbell. I wonder whether what you're talking about, councillor, is already covered. When we talk about enabling the community to adapt to climate change. So surely the community would be seeking to identify what it wants protected.
Look, I did think about that, and yes, you're right-ish. I just felt it might be beneficial to have something a little bit more explicit. But if the view of other members of the committee is that 2 covers it sufficiently, I'm not going to die in the ditch on the matter.
Mr. Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That sort of mirrors my thoughts too. I think also number 1 covers it as well in terms of the hazards management, where you might be doing works to stop the need to relocate a road or a settlement. And then 2 is that second part. Well, if we do need to adapt, move to higher ground, that type of thing, that could happen if 1 doesn't work. So I think it's captured there without being too specific on the locations. That's sufficiently broad, I think, that we don't need that probably.
Councillor Blackler.
Well, retreat in disarray.
Thank you. Just on the back of councillor Hopkins' points, I wonder if under strategic objectives for natural hazards, I wonder if there should also be SDRRNH number 3 in that section around specifically adapting to coastal erosion. It might say something like the effects are recognised, blah blah blah, and takes into account natural systems and processes, enables the community to adapt and respond. Just kind of sets out an objective that we're actually going to construct some sort of meaningful course of action. Whatever it might be, it just kind of spells it out specifically rather than lumping it in with climate change, because there are natural processes outside of climate change that are impacting coastal erosion. I have 4 other specific points, which I have shared with you guys prior to the meeting. So should I just go through them in relation to this chapter, and then you could respond, or?
Well, were you gonna
Yeah, I will.
Mr. Campbell?
Yeah, perhaps just come back on the first point if we carry on, Councillor Black. I think the natural hazards objective is very broad and kind of more encompassing. So I think it would pick up coastal erosion or anything specific as well. And the climate change one's sort of saying we'll think of it longer term than just the immediate hazards. So I think we tried to split it out that way. So we're not kind of ignoring the coastal hazard issue. It's caught up in that first one, and then climate change is across all types of climate related areas. So yeah, I think we have to be careful not getting too detailed in terms of the specific coastal issue, for example. So it's trying to be quite broad across all hazard types and all climate change matters.
Just before I give you a right of reply, Mr. Mayor, I see you've got your hand up online.
Yeah, just a couple of things. So first of all, the adapting to climate change. I think we need to be careful that we're not getting into asset management side of things, and talking. This is about everyone's property and so forth. It's not just about what council is doing with its infrastructure and so on. That needs to be separate to this, but obviously there's a connection in there. The other comment was really around the Councillor Hopkins' reference to removing culture. I think, culture to me is arts and all sorts of things. So I think it's a fairly big slice of stuff that you would actually be removing from that particular wherever it was. So my preference would be that it stays in there, and that we are talking about future recreation, cultural health and well-being needs of the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Blackler?
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Campbell, for that explanation. On the basis that this is only proposed, I'm satisfied with your recommended approach there, and perhaps there's opportunity for further discussion down the line. So the other questions I had were SDNE 03. So it was just, this is just a very light, like something that could be easily fixed or amended. I don't think reflects what we've set out in the Mana Whenua chapter by referring to Kākaunui with incorrect spelling, and also suggests that the Māori place name for Cape Wonbrow be included in brackets. SDUFD 02. I was wanting to understand, or just have a re-explanation of what the definition for higher density housing in the context of Oamaru being a tier 3 town under the National Policy Statement on Urban Development, and what our actual required provision to satisfy housing choice and intensification in the local context. And I guess from my perspective, I'd like to see a softening of the language in this space for that specific one. The SD chapter in general, I kind of wonder if we're missing an objective that focuses on opportunities around our more rural settlements to entice people to live and interact throughout the region, as many of the councillors experienced through the community conversations exercise. There was a few themes around that. Smaller settlements around the district are keen to experience some sort of revitalisation of their places. The SD chapter again in general, I think we're limiting ourselves by an objective, specifically limiting a focus on the currently identified areas for future urban growth. And you know, I think by doing that we might miss the opportunity that could be presented from, you know, possible central government funding infrastructure initiatives that allow us to deliver the views that have been expressed on other chapters by the subcommittee around allowing further intensification in the rural lifestyle zoning area.
Thank you, Councillor Battler. Certainly the first point around the spelling and the Maori place name for Cape Womberra can be included. They're fairly minor tweaks that should be doable. So the high density housing in the context of Oamaru, that's kind of come out of the spatial plan, so it's giving effect to that and it's spelled out there. So if we do need to kind of refer back to that, we could do that as kind of a short sentence that would say this gives effect to the spatial plan if it's not already in there, and explains that context. So I think that's important that people can go back and see how it came about, because the plan is giving effect to that document, and that's common across all councils with a urban area greater than 10,000, whether it's a Christchurch or a Dunedin, they're giving effect to an earlier spatial plan without putting all that in their district plan. So it helps say to people that's how we got to this point to enact the NPSUD. The one about the rural settlements, I think it is captured to some extent under SD UFD 04 on page 29 of the agenda. It talks about the urban environment, but it's clear in there it says the district has urban environments plural, so that's all of the smaller towns and communities, and that picks up that across the board for the whole district. It's not so much saying that we're promoting rural living, because there's also the important rural objectives above that, SDRA 1 to 3, that talk about the kind of productive areas, highly productive land, that rural character, importantly reverse sensitivity. So it's kind of getting that balance of, yes, we want people to live and work in those areas, but not to the detriment of the productive aspect. And then certainly the urban environment objective kind of, and the district-wide growth kind of says, let's do that, but in those existing places already. So it's important. It's a tricky balance. I don't disagree there. And then, yeah, I guess that last one around the rural residential, that's that sort of tricky in-between area that we know we've had a little discussion on. Do we try and relax it to have maybe an averaging type situation of still have the average of 1 hectare, but people could go below the 1 hectare and above it to achieve a different outcome. But also, again, through the spatial plan, saying there's certain areas in that rural residential that in time will be needed for growth, and just a matter of when is uncertain, because we have to track the supply and demand of housing to determine when that might need to come on stream. So it's saying don't compromise that in the short term by sort of just plonking in standard 1 hectare blocks and make it harder to redevelop for residential in future. So other than what's identified in the spatial plan, it's probably harder to go beyond that at this early stage, unless we relook at it in 5 or 10 years and say, actually, we've run out of land, we need to revisit almost the spatial plan again to see where it can go next. Particularly in the mix of some of that higher density stuff in town, how much of that's being realised versus greenfield development.
Yeah, I don't disagree with your sentiments around those specific future urban growth areas, but I would like to see some wording alongside that talks about the opportunity to identify other areas that make sense if required. And just back to the urban, the SD UFDO2, I guess I'm less interested in that we're referring back to the spatial plan, but what was the basis for those overlays in the first instance?
Just can I, Councillor Hopkins wants to insert his opinions on this discussion, obviously. So, do you want to do that before Mr. Campbell replies?
Look, we cannot continue, in my view, to relitigate decisions that have been made regarding intensification or greater urban density. I know Tim doesn't agree with it. There are things in the plan, a lot of things in the plan I don't agree with. But we can't carry on fighting fights that essentially, in my view, turn in the process to see us turning our back on a significant slice of community opinion. The biggest single piece of feedback we got in the informal consultation, and the planners can confirm or refute this, but right at the outset, when we talk to people about housing, the biggest feedback was more choice, smaller sections, greater opportunity to build in different and cheaper ways. And this is simple. The density things arose out of community aspiration long before they came out as a result of the urban development policies, the National Urban Development Policy Statement. And I just, sometimes we have to say, we may be out of step with the community. We need to let some things be debated and challenged through the submission and cross-submission process rather than relitigated on a regular basis here. That said, I think Tim's right about the other 2 points that he made. And I would suggest with regard to SDUFDO4, either that we say that we reword it to read, the district has urban environments, including small settlements that are livable, or alternatively, that it could read, the district's urban environments are livable, which would capture all such environments. And under urban growth at the end, we could say that we have committed to reviewing the spatial plan and possibly identifying additional areas for future urban growth before 2035. Well, I think we're going to review it within 6 years, but you guys will know. So I think a sentence saying that would actually satisfy Tim's concerns and achieve the objective, which I think is reasonable. And while we're at it on that page, if I may, under UFDO3, a matter of language, the location of activities is managed, because location is singular, activities is plural. Sorry, I don't mean to be pedantic, but I enjoy it.
We've all acknowledged without dispute you are pedantic, Councillor. So, Mr. Campbell.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess it's tricky where these sort of urban development type objectives are kind of setting the scene of what we're trying to do. It gets tricky when we start to commit to future actions of council for we know that the spatial plan and under the NPS urban development, we would have to review that anyway. We do monitoring as we go along. So I don't know that we need to specify that kind of activity level of work we are doing, because this is setting the scene for what we can do. The other things are kind of mechanical things that we don't necessarily want to write into the plan. In that sense, I think we've got to be careful there. how sort of operational we spell out in the plan when it's already an obligation on us.
Or even if we said it is intended to review, consider.
Yeah, we'll have a look at some wording on that 06 one because it's just that kind of signal how that might be triggered, I guess.
Mr Cook?
Thank you. I think as provided it contains a reference to the spatial plan, I don't think there's a lot of benefit in the strategic chapter to put a defined timeframe for review because it'd be covered in the spatial plan documentation, which is another planning document.
Councillor Mackay?
I just wonder if SDUFD04, the urban environment, that could actually be also duplicated into the rural strategic plan and instead of the urban environment called the rural environment, because you're talking about the same thing and you've got the same parameters that it must be livable, connected, accessible, safe and well designed for the community. So you're all on the same playing field because that's what you're trying to do.
Quality of the environmental outcome.
Thank you, Councillor McCone. I guess there's components of that 04 that could be almost integrated into the rural, but some parts may not be in terms of the designed parts where you live, work and play. They tend to be less designed in rural areas because they're by nature, they're isolated and kind of singular to some extent, whereas a town has more of that design element to parks and networks as well. But I'm just looking back up in the rural, we've got that kind of rural character. Yeah, it's whether it's needed in terms of, you know, a farmhouse and its curtilage and access, etc., is kind of different to a network of streets and houses in that sense.
But yeah, and I know that in rural we're talking about problems of reverse sensitivity, etc. But there still is a multitude of rural villages or settlements, whatever you want to call them, within the district that we do need to acknowledge, I believe. But Councillor McCann.
And that's killed up in 04.
Yeah, look, where I'm coming from is the likes of, I'm retiring, would like to build my farm, house still on the property and then see my time out there and everything else. And if you don't have that in there, you have a whole lot of other things that aren't covered off, if that makes sense. So you're saying that if you want to live in the urban, you have these things to live by. And the rural thing with other future plans and ECNAs and everything else, that, you know, you must also cover off what you can and can't do under a direction of the umbrella, which is explained, I think, very well in 04.
Yeah, it's sort of tricky. There's almost an element of that in 02, which is under that urban form and development, but it talks about a variety of housing types, sizes and tenures are available across the district. And then it lists that out. So whether that kind of picks it up as well, because it talks about meets the community's diverse social, cultural and economic housing needs. So it's saying that, you know, housing on one farm might be different for another, for example, and certainly the rules reflect that with the secondary units, workers accommodation, etc.
I suppose what I'm saying is what I've said before is, you know, we understand what we're talking about here, but that word rural, if you're going to be specific, it's either district or rural and urban or whatever it is, but you must name them all.
Thank you, Councillor McCain. I'm just noting that we're getting through our time. I'd remind councillors that we're not here to actually get this 100% perfect. We're here to deliver something that will work for Waitaki in terms of a proposed plan. So I'd be keen to move the conversation on. Staff have obviously taken on board the comments made. Nothing further from you, Mr. Campbell? Do we have a mover then for the strategic direction chapter as we've discussed?
It needs to be adopted as discussed, with
Mm.
amendments as discussed.
With amendments as discussed.
Yeah, I'm not happy with that.
Thank you, councillor Hopkins. Seconded, councillor Linwood. All those in favour? Aye. Passed. We move to contaminated land. I'm sure that we haven't got much of that here. Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I've got three suggestions or questions. Come on, well, hang on, I've gone to my wee thing's gone funny. First page of this, the introduction, paragraph 3, there's a reference to
Councillor, I'm
Chairman,
going
sorry.
to stop you.
Sorry, Mr Chair, you've lost your quorum.
Yep, we're just going to have a brief respite.
Point of order. The conversation can continue, the vote cannot continue. We can carry on talking, you're conscious of time. This discussion can continue with the people in the room. No decision can be made until Councillor Linwood returns. So I intend to continue.
No, I'm going to overrule you because
All right.
councillor Linwood can't vote if she hasn't heard the points that you're making. Madam Governance Advisor, I presume that we're stopping for a morning tea break, are we? We're not.
No, we're not. We don't have a scheduled morning tea break until after the meeting finishes at 11. No, the mayor is no longer online. That's why I've called the quorum has been lost.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Mr Chair, Councillor Linwood has returned, so you now have a quorum back in the room. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Governance Advisor. Please don't feel embarrassed, Councillor Linwood. We didn't talk about you in your absence, and Councillor Hopkins will now speak to his points.
Right, look very quickly, the first page is a reference on that third paragraph to the role of the regional council providing a register and mapping to identify. It does say, please refer to the regional council website for further information. I think those maps could and perhaps should be fruitfully included in maybe the register as well as an appendix to our plan. I know that there are issues with that because the mapping may change from time to time, but that can be addressed with appropriate wording to indicate that there may be future changes. Page 35 at the very bottom of that page is a whole reference. There's a reference to user notes there in the grey, and I just question why it's there. I don't get it. I can't quite see the connection or reason for having it in, and I'm suggesting it be deleted. And there was something on page. There is. Just bear with me. There's an issue with 01 on 36, but I just need to just take a moment to remember precisely what it is. So can Mr. Campbell address the other two?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, the e-plan format will provide a link to those regional council websites for the information, so that's easily addressed. Again, it's kind of that efficiency of trying to have a document that we manage versus how much we incorporate that other councils hold, and we don't want to get caught up in that. The user notes, it is an unusual one in that because of the NES, that trumps everything. So and there's quite a prescribed way to assess and manage that. So it's probably just a more useful thing to have in there so people aren't looking for rules. So it probably doesn't have any harm having it in there in that sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
I remembered what the objective, what the issue was with objective 01 on page 36. again, it's wording really. If you look at the others, most of the other policies and the like begin with an intent, with a verb like enable, require, manage, and so on. I would suggest that the wording of has P1 reads recognise that activities involving the use of recognise. So bear with me, hang on. Recognise the benefits associated with activities involving the use, storage, disposal and transportation of hazardous substances while ensuring, etc. So I'm just proposing that the word recognise becomes the first word in that objective to match the kind of the way the others are written.
That's probably for the next chapter, I think. We've jumped.
Oh, let's check that.
Yeah, so is that
Yeah, you,
That's the six, I should say, yeah. Is that another chapter over here?
yes, well, that's in the hazardous substance
Sorry.
chapter.
well, that's the next one.
Sorry, oh my goodness, oh gosh.
Perhaps you've been exposed to some hazardous substance.
It's snorting uranium instead of cocaine.
All right, so let's return to the contaminated land. It's pretty straightforward. Do I have a mover that? Thank you, Councillor Blacklist, seconded Councillor Hopkins. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Passed unanimously. Now we move.
Chair,
That it was unanimous.
would you say that? Do you want that?
No. Sorry.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, just a very quick question. Can we, or is it, do you see a benefit in including the mapping and or you don't? Okay, that's fine.
So we move to hazardous substances. Again, a very short and hopefully uncontentious chapter.
Well, David's answered the first question, which is why did we have the thing at the bottom, user notes? And I'm just wondering if the planners would accept that we word objective 01 as I suggested with it, so that we recognise the benefits associated, etc., to match the style and way that the others are written.
Thank you, Katrina.
Through the chair, yes, that's something that we can include. It just means recognise is actually in the objective already, but we can just move it to the start of the objective.
Yeah. I'll move the chapter adoption.
I'll just take Councillor McCone first and then.
Just briefly through your chair, right at the bottom of the page, P5, community drinking water protection zones. Could you elaborate a bit more on that? I'm coming from the respect of the rural water schemes that have rivers running through their properties that are actually in the intakes in there. So what are you protecting and what is the zone and what are the consequences?
Thank you, Mr.
Campbell.
Chair. This is really just to make sure that in those identified drinking water protection zones, we don't have that sort of hazardous substance issue where it's used, stores and disposed of there. It doesn't mean that certain activities like spraying, pest spraying, weed spraying can't occur. It's just the reducing the risk of anything accidentally being discharged where it's kind of in use, stored or disposed of in that particular area.
No, thank you. So it just means farming as usual, whatever it is.
Yeah, various thresholds deal with day-to-day kind of use versus that high risk. Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Blackman.
I was just wondering what the definition of major hazard facility is. Like, is there a certain threshold that's defined anywhere in the definitions?
Thank you, Councillor Blackler. Through the chair, yes, we do have a definition of major hazard facility in the plan, and that's defined as it takes the same definition as under the health and safety at work regulations. And it means a facility that WorkSafe is designated as a lower tier major hazard facility or an upper tier major hazard facility under regulation 19 or 20 of that, of those regulations. But our records suggest that we don't have any identified major hazard facilities within the district at this stage, but it's there as a in case there are any in the future.
Thank you.
So councillor Hopkins, I'll go back to accept your moving of the chapter. Seconded by councillor Linwood. Thank you. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And we move to public access. Carried.
I just had one question on this or comment on this chapter. I feel under the objectives we need to add.
Which one, Tim?
This is under public access.
Yeah.
So at the top of the page there's currently two objectives. And
Page 41.
yeah, it's difficult if you're reading the tracked changes link, or so I'm on page 98, but others might be on the non-tracked. I think we need an additional policy that links back to SD RA03, like in terms of the intent. We obviously don't need to refer back to it, but where I feel along with these other objectives, we also need to take into consideration and have the impact minimise the ability of land-based activities and primary production to occur. Where this kind of public access is sought to be achieved.
So, just for my benefit through you, Mr. Chair, can Councillor Beckler propose? Are you proposing an objective PAO3?
Yes.
In which case, what are the words you'd like to see us adopt, please?
Well, so something along the lines of what I've just said about it might be provision, or I suppose it could actually sit under provision of public access minimises adverse effects, and it could just be a subgroup under that, where it specifically takes into consideration and seeks to minimise impact on the ability of land-based activities and primary production to continue. In other words, it would be a negotiation that's had and a practicable outcome is reached.
So, just to be clear, if we can settle the wording today, would that mean that PAO3 could read public access to and along the district's rivers, lakes and coastal marine area is undertaken in a way that minimises adverse effects on, and what's your wording? Adverse effects on rural,
land-based activities,
and primary production. I'd support that as an additional PAO3.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Councillor Blackler. It is quite a long list in that objective, and we've tried to sort of pick up some of that through things like health and safety, community values, that type of thing. But there's probably the ability to add in something around that kind of rural productive aspect. We've got to be careful. It's it's caught up in health and safety to some extent, but it's kind of access can continue where there might be an irrigation infrastructure or cows in a paddock, that type of thing. But there'd have to be an element of health and safety, as well as the access can probably wander through the grass paddock. But if it's a field of sunflowers, it might be a bit more difficult, for instance. So it's kind of saying where it's appropriate. Land-based activity might change and make it more difficult in some scenarios or easier in others. So I think it can be incorporated. That's what we're saying. But I'm
going to be persistent on this one and put forward my view that it needs to be a practicable outcome. So that's what the intent should kind of state, I think.
Yeah, so I think we'd include it, and yeah, the public health and safety would still be in there to cover off those kind of other operational things on a farm. And I think what you're saying is trying to add it in as the ongoing rural land use is considered in the same context. Yeah, we can do that.
Councillor McCone.
So in schedule one, I presume it's PA schedule one, access, in the list of waterways, you have the Kakanui River and you have the Wahimo River listed there. As I understand it under New Zealand law, and correct me if I'm wrong, the Queen's Chain operates in all those other rivers except those two, and the people that own that land actually own to the middle of the river on their titles. So you're actually trying to grant public access on private land.
That is correct, Councillor McCone, as I am the owner of one of those titles, but my understanding is over time, as properties have changed hands, part of particularly around subdivision, one of the conditions of that has been to or not reinstate, but put an angler's access up the rivers. So it certainly is on the Wahimo. Mr. Campbell.
The current district plan includes those two rivers now, and it's generally only triggered at time of subdivision. So if the land doesn't change in that sense, it carries on. But in subdivision, we have the chance to ask that question, is it needed? And then we follow the RMA process for determining whether it's a strip or a reserve and any compensation. So it's currently provided for now, and this is just a kind of rollover of that by and large.
No, thank you for that. But what I'm worried about is, as Tim's alluded to, is someone walking straight through the middle of your prime paddock. So does the Trespass Act or permission for entry go in accordance with what you're proposing here under the wording, is what I'm getting at.
I note that was an affirmative nod, Mr. Campbell.
Yeah, I mean, there's still, unless it's public land, there's still that permission for access normally, because there might be things that the landowner wants to point out in terms of health and safety or fences or whatnot that people need to be aware of, as opposed to public crown land that's different, or a road.
Councillor Hopkins.
Chair, I'd like the committee to decide today whether it's going to add a few words to PA02 and make it very long and convoluted, or do what I think is more prudent and add a PA03 that actually and specifically employs the words that we agreed on, or Tim and I agreed on, and no one else dissented previously. I would like to see us say we want PA03 in clearly and explicitly.
Your response, Mr. Campbell?
I think previously we agreed that we can add that wording into PA02, so it keeps it all in one place, that everything's considered in the round, without singling out one particular land use or land type. So everything's still in there encapsulated, including your health and safety, etc. Just probably cleaner that way than trying to have another objective that's singling out one land use type.
Well, perhaps it could be circulated, the amended PA02 could be circulated. But on the basis that the wording that Tim's signalled, or the intention of the wording that Tim signalled, is captured in PA02, and it doesn't become unduly verbose and lengthy, I'd be happy to withdraw the assertion that we need PA03.
Would you, on that basis, then be happy to move the adoption of that chapter?
Yeah.
All right. Well,
Sorry, just one general question about basically the overall intent of the chapter. So a primary, a primary producer continues to operate in their current land use and doesn't wish to undertake an activity that triggers a resource consent, then everything would continue as usual. at such time as a resource consent is applied for, there may be the opportunity for the provisions in this chapter to basically require the granting of an easement or a covenant or such things. Am I reading the intent of this correctly?
That's sort of set out in PAP2 where it's normally that trigger through subdivision. If people want to gift access or create easements, that type of thing, or QE2, register their land, and that might pick that up. But otherwise, it's really only created through subdivision. We work through those considerations.
So the PAP2 public access, when land use application, would the renewal of an irrigation consent at its expiry date, provided it was just to continue with a similar or better system for the environment, would that trigger this in this instance?
Yeah, it's the first part there, encouraging opportunities and mechanisms. So it's not a requirement. So it says that someone might come along and it might be a sort of one-off where they're putting in a track or putting in some sort of infrastructure. It might even be a regional council, flood protection, that type of thing, where they say, well, that might help give access to this particular waterway. It's not usual we would provide it, but this a land use consent for those type of scenarios might say this enables access, and the consent holder might be willing to allow access, or it might be a change of access, for instance. So it's not a requirement through that land use consent, but it's where there's that opportunity, particularly where it's more a public body or someone doing that work. It's probably where it would come in, as opposed to someone just renewing or changing the irrigation type. It's probably not going to create that opportunity per se. Yeah.
All right.
I'll move the adoption of the chapter with amendments as agreed.
All right. Seconded by Councillor Blackler. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
That's carried. We're now going to see the light. Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I've got four that I'd like to raise. On the very first one, introduction, third sentence. However, artificial outdoor light may result in adverse lighting effects that can cause nuisance to nearby residents. I'm a bit troubled by the word nuisance. I'd prefer to just stick with the RMA thing and say that can adversely affect amenity for nearby residents. On page 46, again, under the benefits of artificial outdoor lighting, under 3, I just don't see the relevance of the word cultural in this context. If you read it, outdoor lighting provides for the use of outdoor lighting that does not compromise the social and economic well-being or health and safety of people and communities would seem to me perfectly adequately cover everything. On the next page, light sensitivity, reverse sensitivity, I should say. The difficult, we need to perhaps reword or work on the wording a wee bit, because where it says here, where new sensitive activities located in the town centre zone, open space zone, sport and active recreation zone and industrial zones, minimise reverse sensitivity effects by ensuring that habitable rooms are designed and located to minimise adverse effects of light spill on people's health and general well-being. Now, the way I read that, or the way that's written, it could reference habitable rooms that already exist, and I can't see how this the reversing of the reverse sensitivity effects can apply retrospectively. Surely, light P3 can only apply to new dwellings or new habitable rooms. So that's I just think some wording needs to be changed there. And finally, on page 50, under light standards, light S1, matters of discretion are restricted to, and number 2 reads any benefits on the well-being. I don't think you can have a benefit on the well-being. I think it should read any benefits to the well-being of people. So those are the 4 things that I'd suggest have a little bit of or perhaps need some consideration.
Your response, Mr Campbell?
Thank you, Mr Chair and Councillor Hopkins. So starting backwards, we can change the on to a 2. That's a good suggestion. What about the new activities? Sorry, just missed the page there. P3 does state where new sensitive activities, and this is in more sort of built up zones. It's not so much the residential area, so it is careful to say where new sensitive activities locate, and then the habitable rooms of those new activities.
Oh, okay.
So it would-
Well, maybe they're associated.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So it's definitely not existing. Yeah. So certainly the nuisance one, we can change that to the amenity suggestion as well. That's fine.
And I'm asserting that I don't see cultural making any improvement. I'm sure other people will want to see it left in, so I'm not going to fight on that one.
Yeah. That one there sort of picks up some of that dark sky issue and other things as well. So yeah. So it's probably best we leave it in, I think.
Yes, no, the deputy mayor's made a great point. The Christmas tree with its lights is a cultural benefit. Yeah, no, well done. Thank you, Hannah.
The Grinch has arrived. Councillor Blackler.
Thank you. Yeah, under lights, in the introduction, last paragraph of the main text on that introduction, I just think at the end of this sentence where it says functional roles such as navigational aids and vehicle lights, we should insert machinery and vehicle machinery and ancillary equipment lights, and then I would also like some incorporation of specifics around the ability of people to continue with pest control. And then further to that, under rule 1 in light, permitted number 4, item 3, if we added, things along those lines to that, like mobile machinery and ancillary equipment, pest control. I just think those things need to be spelled out specifically. And then I just had a general query just to confirm that the overall intent as it reads is for outdoor lighting. So like if someone were to build a shed, like a workshop or something on their property, and it had lighting, would the spill of that be taken into consideration under the provisions of this chapter?
Thank you, Councillor Blackler. So I think, yeah, that the intent is that it's the effects of light, whether it's generated on the outside of the building or inside. So generally, inside lighting with the design of the building doesn't generate too much light spill, but there can be opportunities where it can end up outside, but you'd expect that the design wouldn't cause too many issues. But it could be the one-off case where a big building with the double doors or whatever left open could have that effect. But generally the lighting is higher up, so it kind of dissipates as opposed to a directional light outside, which is designed to light an area. So it's probably quite easy to achieve the standards. It would only be if they left it wide open for any length of time. I'll hand over to Rachel to talk about the other points around the vehicle and the lighting.
So through the chair, there is a definition for motor vehicle in other legislation, and that does pick up trailers and machinery that is associated with those vehicles. So it's probably already called out by the use of vehicle, the machinery and equipment.
As in like tractors, combine harvesters. Okay, that's fine. Thank you. And what about the pest control aspect?
Through the chair, pest control, if it's already happening, would have existing use rights. So this chapter only picks up anything new that comes into play.
Just a query on that, obviously the lighting on, so the aviation side of it's covered. Are you thinking more people out spotlighting, that type of thing?
Yeah, like, so, people trying to do wallaby control, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think the intent of this chapter is around that sort of more permanent lighting, or it might be seasonal. Whereas the one-off pest control, I doubt they'd even get caught in by the time. You wouldn't be able to go out and measure it as they're moving around. So I don't think it's intent to pick up that kind of intermittent thing that moves around, as opposed to harvesting a paddock all night where it's in this kind of same location and more constant. So it's quite a different light effect and issue to deal with. So yeah, I think it wouldn't pick up that type of thing.
Okay, yeah, thanks for the explanation there.
All right, so everyone is happy with the discussion around that chapter and where we stand? Councillor Blacklow, from your, you're happy to move the adoption of that chapter. Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Linwood. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Carried. Right, we move on to the next chapter on Papakaika. Is everyone happy with the way that chapter is written? Councillor Blackland.
I just had a comment around PKP2, number 2, the land will, and then options A and B. I just wondered whether we should be more specific around remaining Māori ownership in the long term. That, like, I think if you read the chapter in its entirety around what the intent of this chapter is, I think it would be better if it specified something like, you know, non-Māori land with intended use or purpose in a similar manner to Māori freehold land, or something along those lines.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, this one seemed to me, when I first saw it, I thought, are we proposing a kind of a general expansion of Papakaika into other areas outside of those that we had originally discussed, and which the Rūnaka had argued they wanted these provisions to apply to? But as far as I can see with this one, these things may be allowed on other land where it can be demonstrated there's an ancestral connection, where the support and where the land will remain in Maori ownership. So it's either already owned by Maori or has been, one would presume, purchased from a third party or group and converted to Maori freehold land. So it's not a general provision. It's very precise and particular. And from that point of view, I would have thought what's in PKP2 covers things adequately. But I mean, I'd be interested in Mr. Campbell's comments on Councillor Blacklow's points.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Certainly, I think Councillor Hopkins has summarised it quite well. And it's clear that it relies on all of those things. So it's an and, it's not an either or situation. So I think it's pretty tight in that respect. I don't think it would open up too much there. And I think too, the other intention is it tries to allow them to pick up other areas that might be in and around other kind of reserve areas as well. So it's probably to try and create a bit of a village or community feel, rather than if there's a one-off bit of land in the middle of it that's not owned, that they could in future own it and then have it as part of that kind of model. I don't think it's to set up a whole new area somewhere necessarily. It just gives them that ability, but there certainly has to be those matters worked through to take the box, so to speak.
Yeah, I'm not intending on trying to question any of the things that have been kind of outlined there. I just felt it would possibly better clarify the intent behind the chapter.
Councillor McCone.
So under New Zealand law, the married land goes through the married land court, and I think it's very well summed up in that first paragraph. So we're dealing with married land under the married land court. We're not talking about freehold land that could be owned by someone who is part of the Ngāi Tahu, but outside the married land, which it says specifically it's about married land. So
Nature does expand, but clearly on a consensual basis.
yeah, I think we've got to be very careful how that's defined on the basis that once you start setting laws, well, outside what the married land court says and what we and the New Zealand government says over common land and freehold land, it gets difficult.
Well, we're going to talk about property rights. The right to buy and sell is fundamental. So, I mean, if we read the whole chapter carefully, the provision that Councillor Lackler was concerned about does expand upon the points made in the introduction that's just been referred to by Councillor McCone. But I reiterate that the papakaiaka on other land is clearly, explicitly and consensually defined in P2. I just don't have any trouble with it at all.
Just further to that, I think it's important under PKO2, it talks about, this is allowing for sort of the housing types they want, but it's also saying of a performance scale that are not incompatible with the zone the site is located within. So it gives some further bounds to that as well. So it's not saying go and build whatever, wherever. It's kind of saying there's still a link back to the residential rural type zones, which are fairly permissive anyway in the type of housing. It's just saying keep it in keeping with that, which I think they're in agreement with anyway.
I'm quite happy with the chapter as it stands, and I'm happy to move its adoption. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Linwood. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Having seen the light, councillors, we now move on to signs. Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, I have, look, a few here, and I might do them in 2 bites. I'll go through page 56, 57, 58 and 59. On 57, I think it might be useful, sorry, 56. I think it might be useful for readers of the document to actually have if it's possible, to include, rather than just reference, the definition of a building or structure. I think it might be quite helpful in that sentence if we can say what signs do meet the definition of a building or structure, if that can be done succinctly. On the next page 57, under sign P2, managing the effects of signs, I'm troubled by 4 because it's so subjective. Provide for signs where it can be demonstrated that the sign does not contribute to visual clutter and adverse cumulative effects. Now, unless we can define what visual clutter in a particular context is, and I'm not sure we can, I think what 4 seeks to achieve is probably achieved by 1, 2 and 3. And I'd suggest that it's either reworded, and I don't have an appropriate set of words, or removed. P4 on the same page, you often see people, I mean, during the election campaign and on other occasions, you will see trailers and so on parked on the side of the road with, a rug sale this weekend, or vote David Cameron best planning manager in the world, things like that, And I take it they're still going to be okay. I was wondering whether such transitory use on signs, trailers and vehicles and vessels is permitted. I'm pretty sure it is, but I'm wondering about the wording of that particular objective sign P4. On the next page, 58, under P7 and P8, enable digital signs, plural, and the next one, provide for signs, plural. But then it's singular, it maintains, and it does not under P8. So I think for consistency, they maintain, they do not, etc. They are for a lawfully established activity. And finally, on page actually 57 and 59 and 60 are linked. Under sign R2, permitted 1, the sign is associated with a temporary activity and is erected no more than 8 weeks before the first day of the event. We go to the next page and we say for local government electioneering, the sign is erected no earlier than 8 weeks before. And I think the language in both of those should be consistent. I'd probably suggest no earlier than 8 weeks in both cases. Actually, I'll do the last one. No, I won't. I'll leave it there for the moment.
Mr. Campbell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, again, thank you, Mr. Councillor Hopkins, for the helpful suggestions. I think the no more than, no earlier than can be aligned. That's easy. I guess with the plural nature of the wording, it might be that the title of each provision is plural, digital signs, signs and overlays, etc. But maybe in the rule it says something like provide for a sign where, yeah, because it might only be one sign we're talking about. Yeah, that's fine. And then going back up to the visual clutter, it is hard to define because it's very context specific and it's around, a density of signage in a certain area. So, for example, you could say that as you drive in from Pukuri to Oamaru, there's visual clutter of signs all the way along, but you might get to a particular area in town and there's a whole lot of signs because it's a busy, commercial site. So at what point, it's not a sort of measure of density necessarily. It's the same, it's different depending on the scenario. So it is a relevant consideration and it leads to the cumulative effects. There's also quite a bit of research in this space where it suggests that a certain density of signs and visual clutter almost nullifies the effect of the signs to the extent that people just zone out because there's so many. Hence, people put up bigger signs and digital signs to try and capture attention. So we don't want to be in that situation where we're ending up, everyone's trying to outdo each other so they can get their sign noticed. So it can be subjective, but I don't think we'd want to put a sort of measure around that in terms of a density of signage in a particular area. But I don't think there's any harm in leaving it there because it does signal that is the issue and it's that cumulative effect of one sign after another. So I think, everyone will have a different opinion on it, but I think you can probably say, well, at some point they become noticeably cluttered and add to a cumulative effect. It's tricky, that one.
I suspect you might be general consensus support for your position there.
Just going back to the other one around the definition of building, again, when this is in that sort of e-plan format, the word will link to the definition in the plan, so that will address that one, hopefully.
Okay. Well, Mr. Chair, with your permission, I'll just deal with the other two then very quickly. Page 60. I'll deal with page 60. In fact, there's only page 63 left. When you look at sign R6, off-site signs, and it says activity status discretionary, it did seem to me, should that per one read the sign is located adjacent to the state highway rather than is not located? I just wondered whether we'd inserted a word that shouldn't be there at all, or whether that is exactly what we mean.
Through the chair, it is intended that, that is in, remains in there, that it was the intention of writing the rule. And that is where most of the off-site signs occur. So it is a specific, way of addressing the signs that do, pop up along State Highway without
Yeah.
consent.
But so it's discretion, therefore shouldn't per one read, the sign is located adjacent, not, is not located adjacent. The point, the word I'm questioning is not.
Yeah, I think that what happens there is, it jumps to non-complying if you are on the highway for an off-site sign, because that's the issue that NZTA have identified, that there's so many signs on the highway that don't relate to the activity that they want to consider those because it's impacting on the traffic safety of the highway. And that's consistent across other districts.
So in short, it's intended. It's meant to be that way. Okay, all right.
So, sorry, just to supplement you that, so this R6 is trying to cover roads that aren't on the highway. Is it? No?
Yes.
So it does both. So if you're on the state highway and you want to put a sign that relates to a business not on that site, it would trigger a non-complying consent. If you're on a local road, it would be discretionary, and council's roading team would give comment on those, on that consent for an off-site sign.
As a discretionary activity?
Yep.
Yeah.
It just jumps up as standard when it's the highway because it's a major arterial.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah, I was kind of confused as well. So.
Councillor McGowan.
So forgive me for being thick or not reading properly, but this only applies to public land as opposed to private land. So I can put a sign up on my private property, but not on the public land.
So the rules are there for largely private land, and obviously the roading authority controls the signs on their road reserve land. If you've got a sign that's advertising something on your site and you meet the rules for that, it's permitted. If you want to put a sign up in your paddock that advertises McDonald's in town, this rule would capture that. The rule's there to support people's own business on their property. It's saying there's a trigger for trying to advertise for something that's somewhere else, away from the property. Notwithstanding the plethora of signs we have now would largely fall under existing use rights. But we don't want any more of them like that, unless it's tested through this consent process.
The existing use rights rule for those signs, is it the real estate and the sign that is there, or is it the content of the, do you get what I mean? Like if the advertising material on the sign changes, how does that work?
So the existing use rights is around the scale, nature and degree of effects. So if the sign isn't any bigger or doesn't change to a flashing and lit up sign, then they can probably change the wording. But it's the degree and nature and scale of effects. So they still have to meet, the minimum wording height, all that sort of thing for roadside signs. But if it suddenly becomes bigger and brighter, and they'll lose that existing use right. Yeah.
All right. If there's no further conversation. Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Blackler. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Carried. Having seen the light and seen the signs, we move to temporary activities.
It will be very temporary, Mr. Chair. Look, on page 72, temp 01 and policy temp P1 seem to me to say exactly the same thing. And I wonder if, do we need both of them? Alternatively, I would have thought that the objective could and perhaps should be reworded so that it reads, enable temporary activities that can enhance social, et cetera, rather than just have a statement. I mean, the statement as it reads is not an objective, it's a description of what can happen. The objective should be, in my view, to do something. Page 74, permitted activity, the duration of the temporary activity must not exceed 3 consecutive calendar days, excluding setup and pack down. It just seemed to me to be perhaps unduly prescriptive, and I perhaps would have favoured 5 consecutive calendar days, without sort of requiring people to jump through hoops. Other members of the committee may not. No, so that was the only thing. Those were the only 2 things actually, because I did have a thought on page 77, but
Councillor Blackler.
Do you want to
Oh, sorry. Mr Campbell.
Yeah, sorry, just a quick response on that. I think the exclusion for the calendar days is to pick up things like A&P shows that might sort of build up for quite a few days before and after. So it's just being clear that we don't want them caught out where they might have, tractors and combine harvesters arriving a week before just to get it parked there, and then suddenly say, oh, hang on, trigger consent. So it's just being clear that some of those one-off events that have things that come and go over a longer period aren't caught.
but they are caught, aren't they?
Well, no, it's saying excluding the setup and pack down. Basically, the events, the 5 days, but the setup and pack downs.
No, I'm suggesting that the duration of temporary activity must not exceed 3 consecutive calendar days. Not the qualification, but I'm suggesting we change 3 to 5. That's all, for the event itself, not the setup and pack down.
This is in rural.
No, it's under the activity permit. Mr Mayor, I see you've got your hand up out in the interweb.
Indeed. Thank you, Mr Chair. My points were on temp R2 and in particular fireworks, and it's very specific, which I think it can be for New Year's Eve and New Year's Day, but often public fireworks displays don't happen actually on Guy Fawkes night, and I would suggest perhaps that would be the same for Matariki if there were to be fireworks. So just wonder whether there's some flexibility that could be shown there.
Thank you for that. Do you have a response to that, Mr Campbell?
I guess where it's saying public fireworks displays, it's clear that it's not a Joe Bloggs out in their backyard. So I think if we, the Guy Fawkes or other Matariki type things we said on or the closest day to that, it's clear it's only for a public fireworks display. So I don't think it opens it up too much. Also, just going back to Councillor Hopkins' earlier comment about the wording in those objectives, I think we can tweak that again as suggested to put the wording at the front to address that.
I just support Jim's comment too around temporary rule 1 in all other zones, shifting from 3 to 5. It's listed as 5 in the town centre open space and sport and recreation. So just wanted to offer those thoughts there. Temporary rule 1. I just wanted to understand if is the relative, this is just a general question for your opinion, is the relative zoning requirements compatible with the community-based activities that might occur in the outlying settlement? Because we can't see the finalised mapping as yet as to where all the zoning, the final zoning overlays sit. I just want an opinion on that. And then rule 6, permitted number 5, using the recent Geopark festival and Glencoe School fundraiser as examples. I wanted to make sure that these types of things would be able to continue without issue. And then, yeah, I just wondered why, in the draft, there was, rule 7, and I just wondered if you could remind us why that one was, removed. So that's on page, for anyone else that's interested, page 145, showing the track changes.
Mr. Campbell?
Yeah, I'll cover some of that. Seeing that the temporary aircraft takeoffs and landings, yeah, there's reasonably generous provisions there, and we've had feedback on that. So trying to pick up what those type of events would generally be covered. So I think that would be fine in terms of those fundraisers and one-offs. Yeah. I'll hand over to Rachel for the other.
So through the chair, with the outlined settlements and whether they should be provided for in R1 and with town centre zone. Typically the settlements are a zone where you can have residential, commercial, industrial, all sorts of activities all in the one zone as neighbours. So it's probably more appropriate in those zones that they're not as permissive as the temporary activities in the town centre zone. So they're probably best to stick in the other zones part of that rule, because of the proximity to residential neighbours for events. And then for the rule that was deleted, temporary storage of goods and materials, that rule was actually flagged to us through the legal review for changes, but we've realised that it actually duplicates what's provided for in temp R4 anyway. We think it was there to manage probably storage of house building materials whilst you're building a house, which is then picked up under that R4 for construction activities.
Thank you for that.
Councillor McCone?
Just a couple of things. So the limited to 50 square metres of temporary, is that just not enough? Where I'm coming from is the likes of Alliance, Silfern Farms, those guys, they have huge marquees put up for client appreciations and everything else. And 50 square metres will be the front door of some of those places they put in there. So are we being a bit protective there? And secondly, just to carry on with what Tim was saying with helicopter activities, fundraising and lots of mountain road bike trials and all that sort of thing. Now, part of the insurance content of those people running that must have a helicopter on site. So, you know, we've got to allow for that because it's a community thing, but you also got to bring in the safety aspect.
That'll be covered by Mothman 78. The exemption.
Yeah, so just quickly, yeah, generally those R6 cover those type of things you're talking about there for that. The 50 square metre one is only related, that's only a restriction for buildings ancillary to a building or construction project. So anything else would be covered elsewhere, such as under R3. Doesn't appear to have any sort of size limit. So I think it's only that sort of builder's shed type scenario that R4 is trying to cover, whereas further up covers the other things. Yeah.
All right, people, I think we've done exceptionally well this morning, but we haven't done that well because Councillor Hopkins has got one further question.
Well, look, sorry, I'm happy if other people are comfortable with the fact that we're drawing the distinction between the zones, but can the planners very briefly say why we are having the 5 consecutive calendar day rule for activities in the town centre, open space, sport and rec zone, but only 3 in all the other zones?
Just inside of that, the likes of the Kiwi show or the agricultural show of that extent, which is in a rural sector, and you'll apply that down here. Same thing applies.
Does the planning department have a response to that question?
Through the chair, there is a distinction and it's mainly around the adverse effects. So if you were in the residential zone, you probably don't want an event 5 days long, 12 days a year, but plus you set up and sit down either side of that. So it is about adverse effects on residential neighbours in those other zones.
All right, if there's going to be no further discussion on this particular chapter, do we have a mover of its adoption with the amendments that staff have agreed to? Thank you, councillor Linwood. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Blackler, thank you very much. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Carried.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, everyone, for your participation. I hope that's indicative of how the future meetings will go. For those of you who have watched online, hope that you're still awake. Members of the public gallery have left during the duration of the deliberations, so we do thank you for your participation. I hereby declare the meeting